Um, so my project here is to study the ontology of molecules. I think there's a lot of things going on at the molecular level, of course, but in philosophical terms, I think there's a lot of material for us to explore. So I'll try to start indicating some paths. This is work that is only beginning, so I don't really have any results, but let's start our voyage. Let's see. Oh my God, what's going on? Okay. So we have an intuitive conception of ontology, right, from our own human perspective, which is basically people, places, and things. And most of our philosophical discussions, sophisticated discussions, are based on such intuitions, right? But now let's imagine that we are the incredible shrinking man, and let's go in our adventure to lower scales of existence. So as a first stop, I'll consider the scale of around 10 to the minus 5 meters, around 10 micrometers. And at this level already, ontology becomes rather strange in relation to what we are accustomed. There's this paper by Purcell which explores how it would, what would happen if we tried to live in a fluid at this level, scale. And our intuitions of swimming, for example, would not work. Swimming involves using inertia or momentum to make water move at a high speed, and then therefore we, action and reaction, we go forward. But when the viscosity is more important than the density, this type of locomotion doesn't work at all. So if we try to swim like in ketchup apparently has very high viscosity. So if you try to swim in a pool of ketchup, it wouldn't work very well. But there are other ways of moving in a viscous field, in a viscous fluid. And to the right here, we have a few principles: the corkscrew, the flexible oar, etc. So this is it's a fascinating piece of ontology, say, of physical ontology, but we are interested in going deeper. So after swimming in low Reynolds number, let us go deeper. And now we are arriving at a level of the macromolecules, right? And now the ontology here, something different happens. It's a world in which you are constantly being bombarded by molecules. So these pictures, they don't give a right depiction of all of this bombardment, which leads to Brownian motion, right? And within a cell, all the reactions happen by chance, and molecules move around at a very high speed all over the cell in the fluid by this random motion, right? And in this strange environment, which is inside ourselves, of course, we have things like a molecular motor, which is this macromolecule, which basically walks on a micro tubule, which quantum physics physicists, philosophers of quantum physics know about already because of Penrose and Hameroff. So, anyway, these molecules are able to move like walking on these tubes based, the energy that is provided for this locomotion is liberated from ATP, but this happens in a random fashion. The molecule must wait for an ATP molecule to bind to a certain site, and when that happens, the molecule changes its configuration and liberates one of its heads, which is down here, and the molecule moves randomly either to the left or to the right, but with a greater probability to one of the directions, which is the direction it wants to go. So in the picture on the right, you see it carrying a vesicle. Anyway, a little like a mitochondria or something like that, carrying it either to the right or to the left. So this is a fascinating world to investigate with philosophical eyes. And this is also a world where apparently there are biological quantum effects, right? This is still controversial. So there's nothing really definitive here, but the first thing to say here is that in this environment, this very noisy environment, it is very hard to maintain any quantum coherence. So the ideas of Penrose and Hameroff are not very well accepted because of the short decoherence times that are associated to any quantum structure, any quantum state within one of those microtubules which we saw. So that's basically the main message, but still there has been some good evidence of certain biological effects happening at this level, at this scale, which are essentially quantum mechanical, right? So I don't know if you've heard about this. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about it. It has to do with photoreception within certain bacteria or algae. So these living beings have certain receptors of light, which are called antennas, and they are able to capture energy from the sun in a very efficient way. So the basic evidence that one has is these quantum beats, which represented on in this graph on the right. What does this represent? It represents, so the basic idea is that light falls on this molecule, this macromolecule, which has lots of atoms, and we see a certain number of them in this picture. The little circle points to a magnesium atom. So this structure here has 8 magnesium atoms, and these magnesium atoms are the ones that are responsible for absorbing light at a certain frequency here. And what apparently happens is that light, the photon, is not absorbed by a single atom. It's as if the wave associated to light excites the 8 atoms at the same time. So they vibrate electromagnetically together. And the fact that you see this curve on the right indicates different environments around each of these magnesium atoms, so they vibrate with different frequencies. Anyway, so this vibration is set up. There's no absorption of a photon yet. Only when this coherent oscillations is led downstream, let's say, is that finally a quantum of energy is transferred to an ADP molecule or something equivalent to that. So because of this, say, wave behavior, this is considered an essentially quantum mechanical effect, because what we usually have in a noisy environment is that this collective oscillation of these electromagnetic oscillation of these molecules would not happen because of decoherence. But in this case, there is good evidence that it does happen. This is still controversial because there are other models which argue that, in fact, this idea is not exactly correct. So I'm not really sure about the status of the final word regarding these quantum effects. But my point here is not so much to defend or not this, just to explore, certain aspects of macromolecules within living beings, because the final argument, the final thesis I want to present is something which you might find strange, but so let us go swiftly to arrive at where I want to arrive. Okay, so after visiting the molecular level, the shrinking man continues his journey. Apparently he never stops in the film, he just goes on forever. And at some point he arrives at the atomic scale. So here we have a representation of an atom. We see it is a peculiar representation. It represents the electrosphere as a little dots, right? So it is interesting to try to understand what that could represent. It's basically saying that if you measured this electron thousands of times, you would, at each moment, if you measured its position at each moment, you would measure one of these dots or something like that. So now the incredible shrinking man is at the atomic level, and he is worried about the ontology of his environment, as he has been in his whole journey. So now, what are we to say about this level of ontology? It seems that at this point, we better adopt a realist approach, because an anti-realist would probably just shut up and do some other thing because it's at a level where we really don't have any access to. So it seems reasonable that we should choose, at least to play this game, adopt a realist position, right? How are we to talk about these invisible things if not in a realist language? So what I would like just to point out is that one of our choices for an ontology is a purely wave ontology, matter wave, and this involves groups of interpretations which take seriously the wave function, right? Does not consider that the wave function is simply a mathematical device, but it also reflects some wave-like properties of reality. So in recent years, there has been a small increase of interest in this realist approach to this wave ontology. I'm not going to mention these bits of research which explore this. In terms of our traditional interpretations, we might say that the de Broglie-Bohm dualist view has a certain attributes a certain reality to the wave function, right? Although it also introduced a corpuscle. The Everett-DeWitt relative state view also is basically a realist wave view. The GRW spontaneous localization as well. But the approach I'm going to adopt is something that I've presented before here. I'm not going to try to explain, but it's very simple. It's a naive form of wave interpretation, which works very well for single quanta. For single quanta, it's basically a classical dilatory view together with the idea of a collapse, which is caused by the measurement apparatus. And for entangled particles, then a little bit of conceptual work has to be done to interpret what's going on. So this is a view that takes seriously the images that have been, scientists have been obtaining concerning the distribution of electric charge or electric densities in different materials. So it's an ontology of, like, a molecule will be understood as some kind of a jello or something that has intrinsic oscillations of electromagnetic nature. So surely it's a smeared entity, right? It's basically a wave that exists. Charge would be distributed, mass would be distributed in space, and all this would take place at a potential, like an intermediary reality. The idea is that these waves are not, they're like potentialities, right? So this is a well-known view on how to interpret quantum mechanics. So concerning the projection postulate, which in instrumentalistic approach is just a mathematical device to represent our knowledge. The idea is that this corresponds to a true physical occurrence, right? So if you have anything that involves a wave and you measure it, as in this example here, the spread out wave that comes from the left, when it's finally measured, it collapses to a very small wave around the ionization, and then it starts spreading out again and collapses again. So this is a very intuitive, didactical way of having an intuition about the ontology of quantum mechanics of quantum objects. And it's what I suggest we can use to examine what's happening here in the quantum realm, in the atomic realm. Let me just mention the null result experiment, which is also very trivial, but a little bit tricky to interpret. But for a wave interpretation with collapses, is something quite simple, right? So you have your object which enters into a superposition here, and it does finally interact with a detector. So there is direct contact between our object and the detector. The detector, this idea of this interpretation is that this detector causes a collapse of this wave entity here, which in this case will collapse to this path. It could collapse to the detector, but consider what happens when it collapses to this path here. So now we have the wave packet going in the lower path, and nothing happened here in the upper path, right? So this is a little bit paradoxical if you have a corpuscular view of an atom, right? Because then you would say, but this atom passed down here. How does it know that there's a detector here? Because the spin properties of this atom are different from what it was here, right? Down here, I didn't draw this, but the spin now is pointing to the -z direction. So there is a change in the spin state of this atom, and how could that be caused by a detector which is far away, right? But if you consider a wave ontology, then there's no mystery. The wave is distributed, it interacts with the detector, and causal action happens here. And then, of course, I didn't talk much about this, but this is obvious. There is a non-local effect here that. So this is just our. I'm not going to concentrate on this. This is well known, Bell's theorem, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of problems that we have, the first is how do we justify collapse of the quantum wave? So that's a problem, a measurement problem. The stochastic localization approach is a possible solution to this problem, but we don't necessarily adopt it. We don't have to adopt it. There's a problem of in two correlated particles. If we attribute the collapse to an interaction with the measurement apparatus, then there's certain problems because we don't know to which side of this apparatus are we going to attribute the causal effect of inducing a collapse, because in relativity you can find reference frames in which this happens first or this happens first, so there's not much agreement here. So maybe the idea of a causal influence, I mean the idea that the detector is the one who causes the collapse, maybe that's not an adequate, that's not the complete story there. This has to be refined in some way. And finally, this I think is important, although it might be considered trivial as well, is that this action, this loss of coherence, this thing that we're calling collapse of the wave function, should also happen without the presence of a macroscopic detector, right? So that's what the decoherence approach tries to do, right? It talks about environmental monitoring, which we might say is an actualization of that takes place without a measurement, right? So this is a very interesting view, but there is a technical problem or a theoretical problem, is that the decoherence approach is a statistical description, and the problem of a collapse or wave packet reduction is refers to an individual process. So in theoretical terms, decoherence does not really explain what's going on, but it does suggest that the direction for completion of the theory in the future, maybe, in which the environment is responsible for this transition of a spatial superposition to a well-defined position. So we can think about that level in which there's lots of noise and random effects, Brownian motion all around. This is sufficient to make a quantum, at this level, this is sufficient to make a quantum superposition lose its coherence. But still, well, let's, I don't know how much time I have. Well, this is a comment that it is very reasonable. One problem with this undulatory wave ontology is that this is also underlying the subjectivist approach in which consciousness is responsible for collapse. or also for the relative state Everett view, right? But our approach here is to consider that all the action occurs at amplification or before amplification. So there's no superposition of macroscopic measuring instruments. So this is also something that there's no really convincing mathematical theory which describes this in a satisfactory way, completely satisfactory way. But we're adopting a more intuitive approach. We're not really looking at theory and trying to understand what can be proved and what can't. We're just being more pragmatical and considering that it's very reasonable that quantum coherence cannot contaminate a measuring instrument. So, okay. So let's talk about molecules. So these are representations of a ammonia molecule, a simple molecule which undergoes quantum, it has quantum superpositions that affect it. And one interesting thing to be stressed here is that although our representation of a ammonia molecule comes in this polar fashion, it is a polar molecule, it is asymmetric. Every time you measure it, every time you measure its dipole moment, it's either pointing in one direction or the other. Every time you measure it, it looks like a classical entity. But theory says that when you have an isolated ammonia molecule, so this is a molecule that is not in that thermal bath, which is not being bombarded by molecules, but which is in some way isolated either in outer space or in some laboratory, then it can acquire a symmetric configuration, which we might term as spherical symmetry. How can a molecule which has 1 nitrogen and 3 hydrogen, how can it acquire a spherically symmetrical configuration, right? So this, for geometrists, this is a challenge, but when you introduce quantum mechanics into the story, that's exactly what quantum mechanics does. So one way to see this is to consider that these two configurations, when they are in a superposed state with certain symmetry, you have a very symmetric molecule that ends up being a spherically symmetric molecule. So this is the first interesting thing to explore when you consider molecules, right? The ontology of molecule. A molecule is not made of little dots with sticks around, rigid sticks. It's like a fluid or something like that. It's like a gel. It's like something that's I don't know how you say it, but it's not rigid, right? It acquires it can acquire the symmetry of its environment. Okay, so this is the basic idea, but I think my time is going up. This is finishing, right?
You have 5 minutes, Osvaldo.
So I was just going to present didactically a little bit more about these properties, making analogies with classical vibrations. Okay, but this is very well known. I mean, nothing any textbooks has this. So so this is like one of the first ontological features of our molecules, right? The small molecules in isolation can have spherical symmetry. Okay? So this is something that our incredible shrinking man is surprised about. But I would like to end up mentioning another issue, which I think is also true, but which is much more harder to grasp or to believe or to agree with. which is related now to something completely different, which is the philosophy of mind. But the mind arises from the brain, so we are inside the body of someone. So, so the thesis that I'm going to present here is that qualities, subjective qualities, like the colors that we subjectively perceive, they are instantiated, they exist as physical, chemical properties, but not outside in the outside world, but inside the brain. And then there's the issue of the level, the scale in which this happens. So the two main candidates are the cellular level. You can also, I think there are many people who would say that it's maybe in a population of cells, or it's either in a single cell or it's also in structures within the cell, which are macromolecules. Right? So I'm going to favor this last hypothesis. There's not direct evidence of this, but there is one piece of evidence which is quite interesting, which has to do with Hering's theory of opposing colors, which noticed that colors, although we have in our retina, we have 3 types of tones. The structure of the phenomenology of colors, there's a structure which involves opposing colors. So yellow and blue are opposing, and green and red are opposing. And this amounts to the observation that you can't really have something that mixes red and green or mixes blue and yellow. So Hering, which was a materialist and end of the 19th century, at a certain point, he suggested that this kind of structure could be instantiated in molecules, which would have like 2 configurational states, one corresponding to, say, yellow and the other corresponding to blueness. So if a single material instantiated these subjective qualities in some way, the fact that these colors are opposing is could be explained by the fact that they are implemented by different configuration states of a certain macromolecule. So this molecule could never have both states at the same time, because yellow and blueness would constitute different configurations. So the idea is that these, okay, so Wahlberg and others, this is an argument in favor of the fact that this cannot be explained only considering the retina and the superior colliculus. So traditional explanations argue that the superior colliculus, which is the first station after the retina for most of our vision, implements this opposing colors, because you do have molecules that turn on and turn off certain colors. And the argument given by Wahlberg is that this is not enough. This does not account for exactly what's going on. So that suggests that such implementation of this occurs more downstream. And so the hypothesis here is that we do have, this is a working hypothesis, we do have a sensorium, which is a region in the brain in which these things happen at the physical chemical level. And that's where, so it is a thesis that claims what is called color brain thesis. And so the idea is that these macromolecules, they are literally colored. So colors don't exist in the outside world, they exist inside our brains. And they are a chemical property of certain molecules, macromolecules, which could be present in neurons, but could be present and most possibly in glia, which are other cells in the brain, or eventually outside the cell in the synaptic region. But anyway, this is the idea. So the suggestion is that the ontology of molecules, of certain macromolecules, we don't know which ones yet, but there are certain molecules that, according to this view, would be responsible for these qualities that we experience. And that is, ontologically, that's something really significant, right? Because we do have certain direct contact with these subjective qualities. And so the idea is to reduce this to the chemical level and somehow try to understand how molecules implement this kind of ontology. So that's basically the end of the story, but of course it's only a beginning, it's only a suggestion. Lots would have to be done still, so we'll have to wait for the development of neuroscience, the coming revolution in cognitive neuroscience, to see if these ideas are minimally plausible. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osvaldo. And now we have plenty of time for discussion. If you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand function. Otávio is the first one. Please, Otávio. Thank you.
Many thanks, Osvaldo. This is, of course, fascinating. Those are so many interesting issues. I have a question about the biological quantum effects, right? What exactly is the evidence for them, right? And in what ways are these effects different from just effects that we may find at the nanoscale, right? Only that they are applied to biological systems. Is that what the researchers are getting at?
Yeah, what I think is that, like, think of perception of sensation of light in your retina, right?
Mm-hmm.
So light is absorbed in quantum units, right? Quantum and energetic units in your retina. So you could claim, well, this is a quantum effect, right? Okay, in a certain sense it is, but it is something that you can explain with a corpuscular model. What goes on in these other effects is that a corpuscular model is not sufficient. So we're talking about the behavior of matter, right? Not behavior of light. To describe light as a wave, this is something that in classical physics people do, so there's not really much, it's not considered like a quantum description. But when the electronic behavior of a molecule has to be described in a wave-like fashion, so the idea that the light impinges on these microscopic antennas, nanoscopic antennas, and first you have these collective vibrations, and only after is that quantized when the absorption of that energy happens downstream. So that is what is called a quantum effect, an essentially quantum effect, because you cannot describe this in a corpuscular fashion. And apparently this is a more efficient way of absorbing light energy. So the suggestion is that maybe by natural selection, this kind of possibility was selected. Although all this is very controversial, so there's really no consensus. So these are initial results obtained like 10 or 15 years ago. It's the only robust evidence, I think, of. There are some other suggestions, but they are all kind of hand-waving in other systems. This is the only concrete which was evidence. It was published in Nature. Initially, these experiments, it's basically quantum beat experiments, which we would have to explain better how quantum beats arise, but it has to do with the oscillation of different units at different frequencies, because each molecule that oscillates in those 8 atoms that oscillate, they have different environments, so they oscillate at different energies. And anyway, so these initial experiments were done at cryogenic temperatures, right? But then new experiments were done at our usual temperatures, right? So at first this was well received, but then criticism mounted from different directions. So it is still, I think it's an open issue.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chris? Dude, you are muted.
Thank you, Osvaldo, for this talk. Very, very interesting. And I would like to go into the details of your characterization of realism within this problem. What exactly are you characterizing as realism? Because from my perspective, I mean, there is a lot of mixture between an anti-realist solution to a problem like the collapse of the quantum wave function, the idea that you require to consider quantum mechanics in terms of single observations, and the solution to it in terms of a representation. So I would like to, if you could clarify, what exactly do you have in mind in terms of realism? Because
yeah, the idea is that, well, first, the human observer is not essential to the picture. He can be removed. So the idea is to talk about what was happening at the quantum realm, not from the perspective of an observer, but with a description that described what happens independently of the presence of a mind, right? So that would be the realist mode of description. So the idea is that the wave function collapse is not a epistemic issue. It's an ontological, real process. That's the hypothesis that this realist wave interpretation furnishes. So why is this view adopted? Because I want to talk about molecules as, well, ultimately as things in themselves, right? But I want to talk about molecules. I want to talk about its formal properties, like its symmetries. As I mentioned, theory indicates that ammonia molecule can have a spherical symmetry. But this is never, every time you observe, it's never in a symmetric state, because every time you measure its dipole moment, you cause a collapse of the system to one of the two eigenstates of polarization. But you know, in nuclear theory, this is a common result that the nucleus, they are in a spherical symmetric state before interacting. So to be able to express these features, you have to adopt a realist view, or else some sophisticated Kantian view which replaces what we call reality by some kind of sophisticated representation. Anyway,
okay, but
you have to adopt the realist view. I think you can adopt an anti-realist too.
Because so Bohr's solution to this is to claim that there is something going on within measurement. So you consider a quantum system, then you consider a classical apparatus, and you put them into interaction, and voila, there's something going on. I mean, that's not a realistic representation of what's going on in terms of physics. Physics should describe the interaction, should be able to describe the interaction. I mean, Bohr's trick, according to me, is to create a kind of image that something's going on, but he doesn't explain it. So it's as unreal as as claiming that the consciousness of human beings collapse the quantum wave function. You need to provide a physical representation of that interaction. That would be the main point.
Yeah, right, I agree.
I don't see that you're doing that.
Well, just one point. So Bohr's view is anti-realist, right? We agree on that?
We agree on that? Yeah, because I mean, many people claim that Bohr is a realist.
No, but I don't think he is. I mean, for
okay, so we agree on that.
He's an anti-realist, yeah. No, what you're saying is, I mean, you're saying, well, look, if you have, Osvaldo, if you have a realist view, you should tell me what happens in the interaction between an atom and a measurement apparatus, right?
Yeah.
And so you're asking, do you have a detailed description of that? And my answer is no, I don't. But so this is something I don't know how to explain, but that does not mean that I cannot have a realist view concerning other issues, right? So
no, but I mean, if you claim that you have a quantum system and that you get a measurement outcome because you make it interact with the measurement apparatus, you should be able to be very clear about the representation, about what's going on between the quantum system and the measurement apparatus. If you are a realist, I mean, if you are a realist, you have to provide a representation of what is going on. You cannot just accept, okay, voila, this is the kind of magic thing going on. I mean, this is quantum. I mean, Bohr's solution is to say, well, this is a quantum interaction. So I'm not going to go further because we cannot go further.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Well, it's the measurement problem, right? I mean you have a solution to the measurement problem. I don't really have one.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we can't talk about other aspects of reality in a realistic language. I mean, I agree with you. It's an open problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, you all. Do we have time for one more quick question? Osvaldo, perhaps you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, well, the last idea is quite, you know, controversial. It's kind of hard for people to agree with the idea that maybe the color that we subjectively perceive is some chemical physical property of molecules or of cell or tissue inside our brains. So this is like the main idea, which if anyone has any interesting insights about it, I'd be happy to hear about it. So it's not something it's not a very widespread view, but I think it's the only solution for a physicalist view of nature.